Please do.
All right, so Jason Mitchell Group, JMG, 4.3 billion in 2023. Nothing short of spectacular. Would love to know your insights as to three things on this NAR lawsuit. Number one, where did it come from? I'm kind of curious. What sparked all this off? Then number two, where's it going come July? And then what are the effects, both positive and negative? I know that you're already looking into the downsides to this, but where are the opportunities as well? If you don't mind sharing that.
Sure. So I think there's a lot of correlation right now, especially in the lending space, in how the community must work together more than ever now with your agent partners that you guys have as lenders. And I say that because, you know, it's going to be so important that if you have a client that you're referring to one of your real estate agent partners, they need to do a very good job up front at explaining the buy-side process. So all of a sudden they don't fall in love with a home and then get told, yeah, but now you got to pay my buyer broker fee out of pocket. So now therefore they won't buy that home. And then they're going to turn to you and say, why did you connect me with an agent who was going to do this to me and whatnot? It's very important that on the purchase side, we got good trusted agents that you guys are connecting with that can have full disclosure up front of what that's going to look like for them. So we can talk about that as well too. And I like open forum when I speak. And, you know, as far as where all this is going to go, it's certainly going to lead to a lot of change. But I think it can lead to a lot of change for the better on both sides, on both the lending side and on the real estate side. I'm also pretty fortunate, you know, I'm on 9 boards right now, Veterans United, Zillow, Rocket, just to name a few of some of the boards that I'm a part of and that I have a lot of information on. New American Funding, another one. And so I've been behind the scenes working with a lot of these groups and also working with their attorneys because we need to know what's going on and if there's any change. What are they saying in DC? What is going on with especially the veteran side of things? Yep. How are we going to find ways for them to achieve home ownership through this? FHA, low down payment borrowers. And there's some solutions that are starting to come to fruition here, hopefully in the next 30 days on how we can solve that problem. Because if there's a major problem with what happened, it's the VA administration has to figure this out because they're not even allowed to charge fees on a buy side. So if there's no cooperative compensation or even on an incentive side of things, they have to create ways that we can roll this into the financing so veterans can have home ownership, because we all know they're the ones that are the most exposed to some of these changes. To Doug's first question, how did we get here? I'll tell you the background. So I'm very close with a gentleman that was a major figure of that lawsuit. His last name is Keller. So I guess you can figure out who that is, but he's a wonderful friend and a great man. I love Gary. He's wonderful. But I've been lucky enough to have Gary really keep me posted on a lot of things as this was transpiring and really using me as somebody that he trusts to kind of relay information to. And he's just brilliant. He's the pioneer of our industry, right? So it was nice to have some information coming from him throughout all of this. But really, where a lot of it stemmed from was NAR's arrogance. And I think that what happened is the dagger for NAR within the next 12 to 18 months. But and some of this is my opinion and some of it is fact, but the fact is the DOJ and these attorneys had a problem with what they considered universal compensation, meaning this whole 3% notion of a buyer being paid this as a universal truth of compensation. So what they did about 3 years ago is they turned to, NAR was getting sued, National Association was getting sued, Keller, Berkshire, RE/MAX, all the lawsuits started to occur. So what happened is the issue was that NAR was claiming, and this is true, that in order to list a home in your local MLS, you have to belong to the National Association of Realtors, which is still true to this day. So I got to belong to the Georgia MLS board, but I also have to belong to NAR in order to have access to list a home in that board. And when you do have access to list a home in that board, National Association of Realtors would say, you have to charge something in order to list it. It can be $1, but you must charge at least $1 in order to list as an offering of compensation. That was the rule.
And just real quick, to make sure that everybody understands this, being a member of NAR is paying for the trademark of realtor instead of real estate agent, correct?
Yep. And also what they say is, the best interests of our agents lobbying group, I think the third largest lobbying group in the country actually is how powerful the National Association of Realtors was.
1.5 million people. That's a lot of people.
1.6 million members, right? That's a great organization. So what happened was they got arrogant in the sense that they weren't going back on, and maybe not as arrogant as they thought they were protecting us by saying you have to charge. So maybe they thought we have to charge cooperative compensation, so therefore there's a value to using our system for buyers agents to be paid. Maybe that was their thought, and it probably was. But what the truths are is that real estate commissions have always been negotiable. It doesn't matter. You can negotiate on the sell side and you can negotiate on the buy side. So the reality of this cooperative compensation and you have to charge, it didn't matter the dollar amount. It was always negotiable. But what they said is we won't remove it or make it negotiable in the MLS. And so the attorneys for the other group said, look, it's already negotiable. Just say you don't have to charge, but you can charge if you want. Nope, we're not doing it. You must input at least $1 into the system. They didn't like that. So if you notice throughout the trial, about a month before the decision came down, all of a sudden the National Association of Realtors said, okay, you can charge $0. Well, it was too late then. And now, as part of the settlement is, now you can't charge anything. So if 3 years ago, you would have just done what was being asked of you by saying, hey, it doesn't matter anyway. Let's be done with this lawsuit and just say it's negotiable to begin with. We won't be here. The National Association of Realtors now is saying, now you can't charge it. And that's a major problem because what they ended up doing was taking a $5.5 billion lawsuit and to settle with the Department of Justice, the Department of Justice wants the headline. And the headline is, we saved $30 billion in commissions by doing what we did and nailing the National Association of Realtors to now saying, we'll horse trade you for $100 million over 4 years, but now you cannot offer cooperative compensation. We'll get our headlines by saying that. In an election year, we'll be able to say that we saved Americans $30 billion in costs. And so they said they agreed. But the problem that they had with this, and I think there are some good things, by the way, and we'll get to all that. But to me, they opened up the door because they didn't say you can't offer cooperative compensation. What they said was you're not allowed to offer it in our system. Well, that's a problem because all the aggregators get their information from MLS. So what they did is they opened the door to real estate professionals to go to a listing appointment and say, you know what? I'll only charge you 3% and you don't have to pay a buyer broker. In fact, I can't even offer a buyer broker. So they get the listing by not offering buyer broker compensation because at the time the seller thinks that they're paying for that, when in reality what they're doing is they're making their home more marketable because now a buyer doesn't have to come out of pocket, which would open the door to more potential buyers. So it made the listing agents, the weak ones, have a discussion with sellers that would seemingly seemed happy by this because they don't think they have to pay as much when it's really hurting the sellers by not offering this, because we all know what buyers agents will do is say, well, you're not offering cooperative compensation. My client doesn't want to have to pay out of pocket, nor do they have money to pay out of pocket. We can't look at your home. So what they've done is instead of where they said agents were steering by percentage of commission, consumers are now going to steer by their own definition of saying, I don't even want to look at that home because I'm not paying out of pocket for my representation. I want to buy a home where I don't have to worry about that. So find me the homes where the sellers are willing to play ball.
Okay, so
So now,
that is a great segue for something, because I wanted to ask you specifically about this. To me, I kind of like to see the forest through the trees, and low-hanging fruit is always what I naturally gravitate towards. Low-hanging fruit here is $500,000 list price, right? Seller commissions on the seller side, whatever they're charging. But now we're going to increase the list price to 515 with a 3% seller contribution to be able to pay that agent. And now we're going to have an appraisal issue of values coming in. Yes or no on that? Do you think that's going to be problematic, that that's going to be the way deals are structured to accommodate that missing buyer agent commission?
do I think that's going to be a problem to accommodate the buyer's agent's commission in the sense of, say that again?
Okay, so $500,000 list price, all right?
Yep.
Instead of paying 3% commission, buyer commission from the seller side, increase list price 515, hope like hell the appraisal comes in, right? And now you got your buyer's commission, but you're buying at 515. That makes sense. So that's a low-hanging fruit, like the one that we all have right now. But our values now going to be compromised, and our appraiser is now going to be kind of put in a box. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, my thoughts are this, is that the perception to the seller, if they had a weak agent, is going to be, but I don't have to pay it. You told me I don't have to pay anything. So even though we all know 515 at 3 is the same as 500 at 0,
Correct.
the problem that they've opened the door to from sellers is this, is that they've already have it in their mind that they don't have to pay anything else but 3%. So that's a problem in and of itself. But the other problem, forget the appraisal side of kind of what you mentioned, which it does lead to that. What I have an issue with is that now the buyer that has their heart set on this home is going to go directly to the seller's agent and say, hey, I want to buy this home. And the seller agent's going to say, well, I can't represent you because of dual agency. And they're going to say, well, why not? And the reality of what they're going to say, because they put themselves in their own position, because they were weak and they didn't understand the value of explaining to their seller how important offering cooperative compensation is. They now have signed a listing where they're getting 3% and they're paying 0. So ask yourself this question. If a buyer comes along because they don't want to pay out of pocket for good representation, they're going to go directly to this guy. But if this guy or girl isn't making any financial gain for representing this new buyer and putting themselves in a dual agency position, they're going to say, I'm not going to represent you because I'm not going to take on that risk because there's no financial benefit for me to assume that risk. So now what does the buyer do? So now they're either going to have to hire an attorney, which means, because I get this online a lot where people say, well, they'll just hire an attorney to do the deal. Fine, but they'll still have to pay out of pocket for that. And the point is they don't want to pay out of pocket. So whether they're paying an agent or an attorney, they're still paying out of pocket if there's 0 cooperative compensation. So it's the same conundrum that they're in. And the only reason, so now the seller's going, I got a willing buyer willing to buy this, but because I'm being stubborn or because I was told I didn't have to, why can't I get this deal done? And what it creates is this. This is the whole problem with non-transparency, that I can't understand how the Department of Justice doesn't see this. See, the Department of Justice wants the headline. Only reason the Department of Justice cares, because our system worked great. They just want a headline for the Biden, and I don't, honestly, guys, I don't give a shit if you're liberal or not. It doesn't, or I don't care. This is not about that. But in an election year, you want headlines, as many as you can get to say, we did right by the. So they get to have this headline that they save $30 billion yearly by eliminating this. But what they created is this. So let's say that I see Kristen on the call. So Kristen's a listing agent and she's representing her seller. I call her up and I say, hey, are you guys offering cooperative compensation? Because my buyer doesn't want to pay out of pocket. And Kristen says, we are. And my response is going to be, well, how much are you offering? And here's what she's going to say. It depends on how much you're offering for the home.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm listed at 500 and you give me full price, I'll pay you 3.
Oh,
If you offer,
okay.
if you offer 490, I'll pay you 1. So now all of a sudden, we're forcing our buyers to pay more money to make our commissions, which is complete nonsense. Because now we're negotiating where we're supposed to be negotiating the best price for our seller. Where do we fall in line with where our value proposition is on the commission side of things? And so now we have this buyer broker agreement where we say, look, I'm going to charge 3%. Hopefully we can get it from the seller. But if we don't, and they're only paying 1, you'll have to make up the 2. But I don't want to make up the 2 out of pocket. Well, then I'm going to have to negotiate 3%. Like, they forced this underground world of phone call after phone call to bake in the commissions instead of just having them completely transparent for the world to see. So that's a worse negotiation. So now if I'm a buyer, you don't think that I may have an issue with understanding that, hey, wait a minute, I could have bought this home for less. You negotiated your commission up. Well, no, that was what my buyer broker agreement read, but I could have negotiated that, right? Well, yeah, before, like, it just opens up this universe of, is it really transparent? Is it in the best interest of the buyer? I hate that. Like, we were very transparent before, and we're opening up this whole like negotiating side of things for only one thing, where they look in the 80s and 90s. I can understand where they thought agents were steering, where you had to come to me to show you listings because you needed my expertise to show you what was available.
Yeah,
My
but that
argument,
shit came to the money pit and lawsuits, right?
well,
Because you
what
were only representing the seller, right? So there was a lot of lawsuits. Isn't that why it changed to the
well, no,
broker
no, no.
buyer in the
Listen,
early
well,
90s
let
or
me.
something?
I want to comment on that. But
All
here's
right.
my argument to that. My argument to that is this: in the 80s and 90s, yes. But every home that's listed on the market, a consumer can see. And consumers find their own homes these days. And anybody that says they don't, they're wrong, unless it's off market, right?
I agree.
So
I agree.
now we can't steer. So if Mark is a client, a buyer client of mine, and he says, I want to see 1234 Main Street. Hey, I got to live and die by what the co-broke is, and it's typically 2 to 2.5%. I got to show you that home. I can't steer anymore as an agent, basically. However, I could in the past. So the argument of steering in today's world doesn't exist. It's now going to be consumer steering, like I was saying. But now, and what did you just say, Doug? Because I lost that train of thought where I was going to go with that on the second piece.
Oh, I was talking about the 1980s with lawsuits because there's only seller representation. You know,
Yeah.
that opens up a whole new chasm of risk, you know?
Well, look, I can tell you, I know a lot about what happened at trial, and that trial was DOA the second the trial started. They went to a good old boy city in Kansas City. The counsel was related to the judges, to the judge in some way, shape, or form. They had to recuse the jury if you bought a home prior to after 1993, and if you bought it with X amount of companies. So there were only 7 out of 9 jurors that owned a home. But here's my whole argument with what went wrong. What they were saying is sellers had no idea that they were actually paying a buyer representative within their commissions. And my argument to that was this: you signed an agreement that said you're paying 5%. It doesn't matter.
5%. You paid 5%.
Doesn't matter how you sell your home.
Yeah.
You know you're paying 5%. It doesn't matter if I kept 4.9 of it as a seller and paid 0.1 to the buyer or vice versa. You knew you were paying 5%. But the reality is they painted a great picture to make real estate look like big business. And this is where NAR got arrogant. They should have never got to that point to trial to begin with. They should have changed the rules, which would have kept more transparency. But now they're forced to now do this settlement to where they're just trying to shave off $5 billion, and then they're going to collect it from brokerages that did over $2 billion in volume to stay an interest group for agents, which is why I think we have two outcomes. One, I think this is the nail in the coffin for NAR, but I also think if there was any collusion, they say there's collusion between seller and buyer. That's bullshit. Their collusion was this. Wait a minute. I got to join the Arizona Regional MLS to list a home, but yet I'm forced to join this trade group out of Chicago to list a home because they have their deals with one another. If you want to talk about collusion, how could there not be that's the collusion. And you know what? All these boards, I list a home for one general reason. So the whole world can see my listing. I put my home in MLS so Zillow, Realtor.com can pick it up and show the world that. So let me ask you this question. Why is it that I belong as my company, we belong to like 170 boards as a company. Every single board that we belong to is different. The Manhattan Board of Real Estate charges me $5,000 a year to be a broker. Arizona charges me $400. In Georgia, I got to pay 0.011% on each closing. Where in Seattle, it's 0.026 something. So if the whole goal is to take the information and publish it to the world, why do you all charge different fees? It's all this backwards good old boy stuff that they do. And they're all in cahoots with NAR because you got to belong to the other to do something from the other. It's BS. We should have a national MLS system that you belong to the national MLS, you can list a home and it's all transparent to you, all of it. Whereas what MLS is doing is they're now coming out and they're killing the buyer experience because what I'd rather see is this, guys, and so would you, because you're going to send your clients to a trusted agent to help you get the mortgage because you trust that agent, but the agent's going to be put in a bad position because there's no transparency. And then the buyer is going to look at a home, and if they had the ability to see if cooperative compensation was offered, they would just skip that home they wouldn't even get their heart set on it. I would direct them as an agent representative to my client, and I would say, hey, Alex, I don't want you to pay out of pocket for my representation, nor do you. Do you want to only view homes that offer it so you don't have to worry about it? 90% of buyers would say, yeah, I do. So guess what I would say? When you look at a home, look in this area and see if they're offering, and it says yes. Because what I said is eliminate the percentage, that's fine. Just say if you're offering it so the buyer can determine what he wants to exclude in his own home search. But because they're not doing that, he now has to ask me the question, and I have to make a phone call, and then I got to call him back, and that's a horrible client experience. So I would, as a consumer, if I knew where to look and say there's 10 houses I'm interested in, I would look for that section and I would eliminate the 3 that aren't offering it and not get my heart set on that home to begin with. Now I don't know, and I'm looking through pictures and I'm like, oh, that kitchen's great, the backyard's great. Hey, gosh, I really hope they're offering cooperative compensation. Please find out for me. That's a horrible experience. They should be able to eliminate that from it'd be as easy as this. If you're 80 years old looking for a home, you're not looking for a 2-story. So guess what? I'm eliminating 2-story homes from the very beginning. Same thing with cooperative compensation. Tell me the ones that aren't, and tell me the ones that are, and those are the only ones I want to look at. Now they don't know. And so they're playing this cross your fingers game, waiting for an agent to call them back.
Well, let's get to the meat of this. I mean, most of the time, it's not like there's a choice. Just saying, most of the time, it's not like you have a choice to pay that buyer commission or not to get into a home. We deal with a lot of buyers that have closing costs and down payment. Some don't even have down payment with the DPA loan. So, I mean, we're talking about a large variety of millennials, which you look at the average age home buyer, that's fitting the mold right there. And most are around 5% down, 7% down with MI, and that's coming from a gift and this and that and the other. So it's not like they have the money, the majority of the buyers, to be able to, take on this buyer's agent. And if I'm hearing you correctly, the buyer's agent commission is at risk. This is not a nothing burger. Am I hearing you correctly on that?
the buyer's agent commission is at risk. It's more, no, I think what's at risk is that somebody has to get paid to represent somebody. You have to. So what's at risk is that the buyer now is going to have to fulfill the buyer broker agreement by coming up with representation fees out of their own pocket. That's what's at risk. But my point is that they don't have to worry about that should they know if a home was offering cooperative compensation ahead of time. That's why I don't like the fact that they removed the variable of yes or no. I don't care about the percentage. I care about the yes or no. And you know, I can tell you this, like, so here's some good news. The good news is for lenders and agents, the good news is this. Every agent should have still been requiring a buyer broker agreement. The reason they didn't is because they were weak agents and they felt as though that it was an intrusive document. So they had hoped that if I get to work with a client, I'm hoping that they use me and they use my services. But the reality is when we hire an accountant or we hire an attorney, you sign a representation agreement before they even get to work. It's a bizarre thing that the real estate agents out there were willing to do all this work without having some protection that they were going to get paid. So we should have been doing this from the beginning. And what I always would tell my agents is, and it's happened to me even too, this is now going to protect you from your client going to a builder over the weekend and you falling in love with a floor plan, signing a contract, and now you don't get paid because you didn't walk them into that builder. It's going to protect you when you can't show a home at 2 o'clock on Saturday and your client is anxious and they want to go see that home anyway, and they end up you calling the listing agent on your behalf, and now you don't get that deal. It's going to help our lenders who connect them with their trusted agents because they're going to get that document signed up front, which means, because here's what we all know. You want trusted agents to work with your clients because you're going to have a higher capture rate on that mortgage, meaning you're probably not going to get shopped as much. We all know that. That's why we have agents that we trust. If we don't have trusted agents, the minute that that client finds their own real estate professional, the real estate professional is going to say, hey, I'm sure Mark is a good lender, but you should talk to my guy. And Mark will lose that deal because the my guy is the one the agent referred, and at minimum, Mark's going to get shopped. That's why we have trusted agents, because it helps us secure more loans. So the buyer broker agreement is going to be a good thing for the lenders as well, because every agent that you connect a client with is hopefully getting representation signed. So they're now more sticky to that agent, which means they're going to be more sticky to you as the lender. So that is a good thing to get the buyer broker agreement signed and become more commonplace, 100%. The other good thing is that I know the administrations right now are working on, and they're going to go to Fannie and Freddie next. When you think about how we underwrite a loan, the reality is the closing costs or commissions, they're already baked in to the risk of the loan. And for those of you that say, well, how is that true? Think about it. If it's a $500,000 mortgage, okay, and let's say there's 5% in commissions, 25,000. Let's say there's 10 grand in closing costs, okay? That's $35,000. What that means is that that asset is not worth 500,000, and the bankers know that. The asset's really worth 465 because there's $35,000 in fees. But yet they're buying a home at 5, putting 25% down, so they're putting 100 grand down. But the reality is that 100,000, the bank is still financing at 20% down, which 7 or 6% of that really is from fees, but they're counting it as part of the loan. So it's already done this way. It's just labeled on the settlement statement differently, and it's underwritten through DU differently just because it's verbal, just because it's coded that way.
It's a really excellent point. Yeah, it's an excellent point.
They just need to find different ways to code this as part of the actual closing cost instead of it coming off the seller's net. But the reality is that when a buyer the buyer has always paid for fees. They've always paid for fees. The only way that they haven't is that on a VA loan, because they can get 100% financing, they're assuming the risk at about 104 to 105%. But the reality is on your typical loan that you guys do, those fees are already accounted for. It's just on a different line item.
Agreed.
So I think,
Agreed.
so number one, I know the VA is working on coming out with immediate action to allow veterans to do so. If they do that, you know FHA is going to follow.
100%, of course. Yeah.
And then, because here's what I said. And my good friend Alvaro, who's the CEO of Commissions Inc., if you've heard of Sync, him and I were having this debate, and he was enlightening me on a lot of this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's true. But here's the other side of it. Banks make money when they lend money. They want to loan as much as they can up to a guideline. So for them, they want to be able to still loan on closing costs. They're going to find, because here's the thing, here's the alternative if they don't. You know how many loans they're going to lose if they don't allow closing costs to be rolled into a purchase mortgage? They're going to lose so many deals because people won't be able to pay it. And they know that. And that's not just VA FHA. That's the person that is saved for their 10% down that's doing an 80-10. They don't have an extra 3-4%. So it's in the best interest of banks to find ways to roll this in as part of costs, just if not more than the real estate community. So we're going to get to this world where there's going to be a carve out that all these representation fees or whatnot, it's just how you structure them into the contract as closing costs. They have to do it. Otherwise, that's why purchase lenders are at the biggest risk here. They're the most exposed by all of this because they need their clients to be able to get into a home and roll those costs into the mortgage.
That's actually a perfect segue. First and foremost, we went over where did it come from, where is it going, and where are the opportunities and the challenges. Thank you very much for going over that thoroughly. Do you mind if I take a little more time and open it up to some Q&A?
Sure.
I'd like to start the questions. I've never taken you as the guy that sits around and waits for shit to happen. So, what are your thoughts on somebody right now in a real estate business on the buyer side getting their dual license MLO to hedge the future?
I keep hearing that. The problem is, I think the agents that do that are the ones that have enough time to go get licensed and therefore aren't that busy in real estate. So I'm some long term.
Everybody, is that my internet or is that his?
I think it must be his.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I think he dipped. Right when we get to Q&A, I hope he joins again. Has this been informative for you guys?
Been really good.
Yes,
Okay,
a lot.
Good.
I was going to ask him a question and maybe get your thoughts, Doug. We're kind of in the beginning stages of trying to see and project and understand how everybody's going to be affected by this. A lot of it's speculation. What are your thoughts so this thing starts in July, right? Is when.
He's coming back in.
Oh, okay. Oh, wait. Are we still recording?
Yep. Which I'm going to shrink this down and make it kind of social media postable for everybody to be able to post this out.
Perfect.
I'm sorry. I don't know what happened there.
No worries. I appreciate you rejoining.
Yeah,
You kinda-
if I was a lender and I was like, I would not be concerned with, I would not be concerned with, what about if agents get licensed, can they take more market share? I think that's a horrible experience. I really do. And honestly, if you're a smart consumer, you don't want your agent representing you on the lending side. I mean, and I also think from a scrutiny perspective, look, if you guys noticed, Rocket cut that off. They're not doing it anymore. They used to license State Farm and Charles Schwab. They said this is way too much work than what it's worth. I don't like that world. I think that world ultimately gets shut down anyway. I don't like it, and I don't think any lender should have a fear of that. I keep hearing that's going to be more common, but I just don't see it. I really don't. I
Well,
mean,
I do have to say for the record that Nexa offers the Academy, which is basically teaching an LO how to become self-sufficient. So it's different than the reload programs we've seen from Quicken, which is, hey, give me the contract, here's 50 bips, get out of the way. We actually teach people that want to learn how to originate. That's one of the reasons for the question
I
is
know,
it,
I just like, but if you look at it, the one writing the loan, look, this is my opinion, right? But like, I don't know. I look at that as like,
jack of all
you know,
trades, master of none, same thing,
I know,
right? Yeah.
I really do. I really
Yeah.
do.
Our owner of Nexa looks at it the same way, honestly. So I appreciate your honesty. Open it
Yeah.
up to Q&A. Mark, you had another question.
Yeah, hey, Jason, thank you. Very informative. I've had a few realtors calling me scared, and most of them are buying on the buy side. And, I know you don't have a crystal ball, but, as we're moving toward July, when everything is going to be, executable in terms of these new changes, do you think a lot of the uh, possible foreseen issues will be resolved before July, or do you think it's possible we're going to see some chaos hit the market in July as things start to get flushed out, maybe that weren't foreseen?
From what I'm being told, July is an unreasonable time frame that they're already working on getting extended. So that's one thing. The other side is that I think a lot of things are going to get worked out between now and whenever this goes live. I mean, I've talked to several groups that are basically going to try to eliminate NAR to where there is transparency and cooperative compensation. I think that I think the cost of rolling in also will be able to become effective here at some point in the very near future. If you're a strong agent, I wouldn't be worried about anything. In fact, if you're a strong agent, look, the reality is on the initial call now, you just have to lay out all your cards through transparency, which is, hey, just so you know, my representation fees are part of this buyer broker agreement, which allows me to show you property. The key is we want to make sure that we find properties that pay for my fees through the closing and through financing rather than have you pay out of pocket. In the cases where that's not applicable, I will let you know upfront and you can determine if you want to view that home or not. That's it. And if you have that simple of a discussion, any consumer is going to say, great. It's those that fumble or those that aren't, or those that actually are say, well, I'll charge you 1 instead of 3. Like, why? No consumer cares if they don't have to pay out of pocket. They won't. And then you state your value prop. I'm a full-time agent. I'm here 24/7. I'm going to open up all the doors for you. I'm going to negotiate not only the deal, your inspection. I'll be there on your walkthrough. Like, you got to express your value proposition up front and explain why that's what you charge on your fees. But the goal is that you never have to pay out of pocket. And this is how we're going to alleviate that concern. Those that have those discussions are going to be the ones that win. The agents that can't have those discussions, which again, how hard of a conversation is that? I mean, again, going back to my buddy Alvaro, I'll give you another example that he said. He said to me, he's from Argentina. And he said to me, he goes, Americans don't negotiate. So why is this a big deal? And I said, what are you talking about? He goes, well, think about it. When you go to dinner, what do you pay? What do you pay when you tip? I go, I don't know. He goes, when you tip, how much do you tip? And I go, I don't know, usually 20% because it's easy to do the math. And he goes, okay. So if you get great service, you tip around 20%. I said, yeah. He goes, what if it's pretty good service? I said, I don't know, around 20%. He goes, do you ever not leave a 20% tip? I go, no, not usually. He goes, exactly. He said, this country doesn't negotiate. He goes, when you hire a lawyer and he shows his fees, do you say, hey, instead of charging me 600, will you charge me 400? No, because that's the fee set forth and you sign the agreement. The reality is, if you explain the representation agreement, what you charge is what you charge. And most people aren't going to have an issue with it. Where they're going to have an issue is when they have to come out of pocket. So those that explain the buyer broker agreement upfront thoroughly to a consumer are not going to have any issue with this. But where they're going to win is they're going to have a consumer that's going to be more loyal to them because they know they've signed an agreement. That's where they all will win.
Beautiful answer. Anybody else?
And here's the other side, guys. I have this thing out there. You can look it up online, go to it actually, because I got a lender section. It's called the Realtor Pledge. So go to the Realtor Pledge and help
Thank
us
you.
spread
I
the
had that written down. I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah.
Here, I have it
But
pulled up.
you guys as lenders need to tell your clients too, and your agents, don't be a punk and tell your sellers to offer cooperative compensation because it makes the transaction easier for all parties. It makes your home more marketable. It makes because of the buyer who wants to see homes that offer that through. And it makes the ability to transact significantly easier if the seller is willing to say, I'm willing to compensate you through my net proceeds in terms of on the settlement statement coming from my side. The only way that this breaks is that the community of real estate agents go into listing appointments and say, we don't have to offer anything. Don't worry about it. That's where everything gets dicey, because otherwise you're left with the seller that's going to have to somehow, someway, because people were saying online on the real estate mastermind, they were saying a buyer can represent themselves. And my answer to that was, well, I could drive my car with my feet too, but that don't make it smart. The reality is that there is no buyer out there, none, zero, that can buy their own home as a resale home because they don't even know where to start. Someone said, well, you used to work at Pulte Homes. You represented individual agency. And my argument to that is buying a new construction home is a completely different world than buying a resale home. If you drove down the street and saw a home that you like, there is no way as a buyer that you would even know where to start. And even if you found a purchase contract online, you don't know what that means and how to fill it out and what contingency this and what addendums. Is it on a septic tank? Is there a pool? Like no one even knows. So then they say, well, then they would just hire an attorney. Okay, great. You can hire an attorney to write the contract. Is that attorney going to show you 4 Saturdays in a row, 5 different properties, take you through them, have one fall out and re-show you more homes? That's where the time constraints come in, because people say, well, they'll just pay you hourly. Well, if you consider the real hourly of a buyer broker, it may exceed the 2.5% that's common today. A $400,000 home is 10 grand in commission. But if I'm charging $400 or $300 an hour for my service, there's probably 30 hours of work to get a buyer into a home when you consider the entire transaction. And the other side that you would see is this. All of a sudden, this is why we'll never get to that world. You're going to send me a bill like a lawyer, and you're going to say, you're going to mark all the things that you did for your hourly rate. And then a consumer is going to go, by the way, they would still have to come out of pocket, which doesn't cure the main problem. But even if it was paid on a service level, hour by hour, you don't think every single buyer is going to look at that and go, you looked at properties for me online to help me for 3 hours? You counted driving to my home? You counted driving to the first property? You don't think they're going to look at that and just start? They're going to get sued a hell of a lot more because they're not going to believe the service level that they did on the. If you've ever hired an attorney, every time you get that bill, I know you look at it and go, dang, that's more than I thought it was. And it's non-transparent. You don't know what hours that attorney spent. You're taking their word for it. You don't think buyers are going to scrutinize every bill if that's what we came to? That's not a solution.
100%. And I did post the Realtor Pledge link in the chat. Look, you guys, when you look at these shirts, and it's just a shirt. I think it's like $50 or something like that. if you're doing any kind of marketing or especially in presence with realtors, you're going to want to be flying one of these. I mean, that is like you're supporting their plight, you know. And at the end of the day, that's where you want to be. Any other questions?
That's where we have to stick together. And guys, listen, I'm telling you, lenders have the greatest and hardest job at the same time, because being a LO is such a thankless job. Being an agent is like the easiest part of anything. I don't want to say easy, but it's significantly easier than a loan officer. And they're the ones that always get the gratitude, the agent. They found me my home. They were such a pleasure to work with. Yeah, because all I had to do was I had to show you houses, you agreed to it. And again, I'm not saying it's easy, but the hardest part is, wait a minute, you need another pay stub? Why do you need another pay stub? You need I already sent you that. Like, man, you guys are the hardest ones working on these transactions. And you're also the ones getting the least amount of appreciation from the client, because that for some reason, they just feel that someone should give them $500,000. And you're sitting there trying to help and work with them, but yet you're asking for things so they get mad at you. Or, what do you mean my appraisal? Do they know I put ceramic tile in that thing 2 years ago? And like, it is the hardest job being a loan officer. And so I say this, that like, I'm so on the side of loan officers when it comes to so many things, because it is harder than being an agent, and it's less thankful than being an agent. It's a grind. Being an LO is very hard. And that's why if you're really good at it, you can do really well. The agent side is significantly easier. And that's why I always say too, you get these arrogant realtors that for whatever reason want to always cause fuss with the lenders. Where's my appraisal back? You don't think I want it back either? You don't think I want to see where we're at on value? But there's always a fight, it seems to be, with bad agents and loan officers. And loan officers have to be the ones that are always coddling and trying to make people happy when you're dealing with arrogant agents. But what we need to do together more than anything now is stick together. We need to be a community that understands what's in the best interest of our clients is working together to make home ownership the most simplistic form of home ownership out there. And that's by having full transparency to every client that we service. That's why when you guys connect your clients to an agent, you need to connect them with trust and confidence that they're going to go over everything from the very beginning. Because what happens with anything, when you make a referral, if something goes wrong, you're always the one to blame. So you need to make sure now more than ever that you're referring to really good trusted agents that are giving the whole story up front to those clients, so it doesn't end up becoming back like no good deed goes unpunished, right? So you don't get the backlash. But here's the thing, you have to refer to trusted agents, because you can't allow them to go find their own bad agent. But you need to make sure the agents that you're referring to are having these discussions up front.
Well, Jason, I want to be very respectful of your time, and we're approaching an hour right now. We got one more question from Alex Chang. Alex, what do you got?
Hey, so I've seen some news articles, I guess, on other countries not really having buyer's agents, right? I think like Australia is one, UK might be another. What are the chances? I know you said the sellers, like me as a buyer, if you tell me I can only look at houses where there's a cooperative compensation agreement, that's going to eliminate my key desire, right? If I want a house, I want that house. I might just go straight to the listing agent.
Then you got to be willing to pay for it.
But so if I can go straight to the list agent, because like you said, most buyers find their own houses anyway.
That's the problem though, Alex. The problem is they won't do it now. See, in today's world, I've done plenty of dual agencies. It's the only time I've been sued, by the way. So I stopped doing them. But the reality was this, Alex, this is what you got to understand. It's because it's already been set in stone that there's zero on this side. Where it is today and what it used to be, if you have 3 and 3, I will take the risk of representing you as a buyer because I at least am getting compensated for that risk. Or what I would typically do is I would say, I can't represent you, but I will get you to somebody that can. And I would refer that client to a buyer's agent where there's 3% payable. and I would take a 50% referral fee and they would make 1.5 points. The problem is dual agency will not. So what you're saying is I want every home to be available to me. And in the cases where they might not offer cooperative compensation, I'll just go directly to the seller. But what you're going to find is you're going to call that seller and the seller is going to tell you, I can't represent you. First of all, in a lot of states, it's not even allowed anymore. But most importantly, that listing agent isn't going to want to take on the responsibility to represent you because they're getting 3% regardless of who buys the house. So why would they take the risk of representing you when somebody else is going to come along who can pay out of pocket because they're still making the same amount of money?
Really getting.
I mean, I've had investors that use it as a negotiating strategy, right? Like I'll go to the listing agent directly, say, I don't have a buyer's agent. Can we knock 3% off the price? And then we're just going to take that from the 3% buyer's agent fee.
That's what he's
right?
saying, Alex, is now it's a no-go. There's no 6%
Yeah, but
anymore.
Alex,
Like listing agents would still take the offer for 3% to represent both sides. Like that's also
no, they won't, Alex. They won't because they're still
no
only-
listing agent in America will take a dual-sided transaction for 3% on a $500,000 house.
Alex, now you're being a smarty pants. The point is this. The point is, yes, there are agents that will, but those that do, the smart ones will not. But yes, some will to make their 3%. But anybody that has common sense would say, I'm making 3% no matter what. Why am I opening myself up to all this exposure to when I'm supposed to have fiduciary to my seller? And now that's why the initial discussion up front to a seller is so important. I don't want to be in a position of dual agency. Therefore, we have to offer cooperative compensation because you don't want me representing a buyer with the same integrity that I'm supposed to be representing you. That's why the initial discussion up front becomes so important. Will there be agents that represent for zero gain? Sure, there will be desperate ones or ones that are willing to expose themselves to a situation that you don't want to. Yes, there will be, but smart agents are not going to take the response. And by the way, it ain't up to the agent. It's up to the broker. There's going to be a lot of brokerages out there that say you're not allowed to do this. And I'm telling you what, I'm one of them. I will not allow one of my agents to represent both sides without a financial compensation on the other side because there's no point to doing so.
But you don't have
just-
to, Jason, you don't have to. We're in a total seller's market right now. Inventory is minimal. So it's not like we're short of buyers right now. I mean, if we only had the buyers that needed to do that, that might be one
No, but
thing.
to Alex's
got
point,
4 or 5
no,
other
what Alex is
offers.
saying though-
Yeah.
Well, no, what Alex is saying though, and here's the other side that you said too, Alex, that this is why cooperative compensation, it doesn't matter because it's all about the net deal. You just said, hey, I'm unrepresented, so take 3% off the price. Well, guess what? That's the same way if I'm a buyer broker, if I'm a buyer's broker, and I know that there's cooperative compensation there, the adjustment of price isn't necessarily as relevant. But if you're paying 1% as a buyer compensation to the buyer's agent, you don't think that my buyer's going to say, tell them to take 2% off the price because they're not paying you your full commission? Of course they're going to do that. So at the end of the day, it all becomes the same. Whether you're offering cooperative compensation or someone negotiates you down 3% because you aren't, it's all kind of the same way when you slice and dice it. But the dual agency part, it's going to be, you're putting buyers in such a bad spot because a lot of agents are going to say, I'm not going to represent you to buy this home. So you're going to say, well, shit, I got to either get an attorney or I got to find somebody that can draft this thing up, in which case you'll have to pay out of pocket for those services.
I guess the argument then is the only thing really stopping our market from becoming like Australia's market, where there's already not a lot of buyer's agents, is just almost like pre-negotiated listing agents, like you said, all standing collectively and saying we're going to hold strong at 6%. But like buyer's agents or buyers get by just fine in markets like Australia, right? Where there is dual agency. Like it's,
you know what? I disagree with you wholeheartedly. We were buying a place in Europe and guess what happened? You know what homes I saw? The only ones that agent was representing. I had no clue how to find properties. Zero. And the US does not want us to become Australia. They don't. Why? The US is heavily in the insurance business. And I can tell you right now, forget the brokers. insurance companies that offer your errors and omissions insurance, they will never allow a world of dual agency because they would expose themselves to E&O claims like you've never seen before. So no one wants the US to become like all. In fact, most countries were transitioning into the way that we do it in the States because the way that we did it in the States is the right way to do it. The only reason the Department of Justice got involved on this right now to make these headlines is because we are in an election year. They don't care. They know you're going to negotiate commissions on the seller side. They just want to say you're not allowed to offer it. That's it. But there's so many factors that would remove us from becoming some of these countries. One, brokers don't want dual representation. They expose themselves. Two, insurance companies don't want dual representation. They expose themselves. And three, if you want to talk about real steering, you call me and I have this listing. The only other homes I'm going to show you are homes that I have that I can be financially compensated from because you don't want me to represent you as a buyer, where today's world is, no, this home won't work for you. And you're being honest with the consumer. But you know what? Let me send you a few listings that aren't even my listings. And now I could represent you with full integrity on the buy side because I don't care about those other listings because they're not my listings, but I can still get paid financially for representing you. Like, it's just, it's the transparency that killed a lot of things, but there will be buyers that go to sellers. Yes. What I'm saying is it's going to get squashed in a lot of cases due to the risk tolerance.
I get it. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. So like, obviously I got, I'm not a real estate agent. It just seems like, okay, to your point on the steering issue, if you are only directing clients to where listings can pay you because they can't afford you, does that open up the door for steering?
We're not directing. The consumers will make the choice on the buyer broker agreement. Do you wish to, it's a full transparency. You can view any home you want, but just know in the cases where there isn't, this is what could happen in terms of my fees.
In essence, the sellers are really choosing, are they not? The sellers are the ones that are going to choose, are they not? Because it's not going on there with the broker buyer unless the sellers agree upfront with the listing agent, right?
That's why it's
so is that
important to
not
have,
like where the leak in the dike is?
yeah, that's why that's the whole point of us as a community saying cooperative compensation is such a great thing. It's for all parties involved. It's a great thing because you're going to get, if you don't offer it, you're going to get negotiated against it anyway. So you might as well offer it and bring buyers to the table. But I do see where Alex is coming from. They'll just come directly to the thing. But the reality comes down to, okay, great, but then what? But it's not about us showing them homes. It's about them That's why what I said at the beginning of this call, consumers are now going to create their own steering, which will move the market where sellers are offering because they're going to say, well, I don't want to pay out of pocket. Just show me the next one. And that's why they're going to get screwed because they may fall in love with that home that they could buy, but they don't got 10 grand to come out of pocket with. And now the seller's saying, I don't want to pay your fees. What are they going to do? They'll go directly to the seller, but are they willing to represent them? I don't know. In many cases,
less showings, right? That's the ultimate outcome is somebody who's not paying the buyer's agent is going to have less traffic, less showing, less offers. Am I right?
That's what I said. I told my company, I said, here's what's going to happen. So many homes will get listed. And by the way, guys, I don't think this is a big problem. I think every logical seller knows you got to offer it. You got to be willing to offer it. I think every logical seller knows. But what will happen is this, ones that don't, in 30 days, this is what's going to happen. Hey, Jason, I've only had 2 showings on my house in 30 days. What's going on? Well, I could have had about 20, but they didn't want to see it because they didn't want to pay out of pocket. Okay, I guess we should offer cooperative compensation then. That's what ultimately is going to happen.
So a good thing, you guys, is we've had about a year or more of selling a 2-1 buy down to our real estate agents and negotiating that 2-1 buy down because rates suck to accommodate rates. Now we're kind of coming into a territory where rates are probably going to come down and they're already used to negotiating a pretty good chunk of change from the sellers. So it could be an easy shift. Jason, I appreciate your time, my friend. Honestly, I really, really do appreciate this. Anything you want to say to part before I ask you the last question? Who's your final 4 pick?
UConn, clearly.
Okay.
Um,
You got tickets? You
no,
going to the game?
nah, I don't think so, even though I'd like to, but,
We have
I
sweet
just,
tickets, man. I can hook it up. I can hook it
no,
up. All you got to do is
thank-
holler at it, brother. I can hook it
thank
up.
you. I want to say thank you to your audience. You know, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to spread the word where you see things play out is what it's like when people say the devil's in the details. What they haven't thought about is the real world of how all this works. And that's the frustrating part. And so now more than ever, we just stick together and we understand that what's important in a transaction and how we need to become true professionals, especially on the real estate side of things, of course, but on your guys' side too, referring to trusted real estate professionals that are good at what they do. And all I'm trying to do is be a voice for both of our communities by empowering and encouraging the offering of cooperative compensation, because as we know, that makes home ownership much more achievable and for the people that need it the most. And that's our first-time home buyers.
Once again, Jason, much appreciation, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Be good. All right, gang. What are your thoughts?
It is really interesting. Could it come down to the part that basically they would reduce even the seller agent's compensation? Maybe the seller would say like, okay, I'm paying like 3%. You guys go deal with it, like, so that you have to come down like 1.5% each.
Okay, so I have another good friend of mine that worked for a company called Rex, and Rex was one of the like people involved in the initial lawsuits against NAR. So they're a big pusher of these lawsuits. Rex is, I don't want to say similar to Redfin, but along those lines. You know, they're more one commission, everybody shares, less commission, blah 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 blah. So they stood to gain. And you guys gotta think about this. Redfin, they're set up perfect for this. Like, you know, they're like an online marketing real estate firm that will give you the code as a buyer to go see the house. You don't even need a realtor. They're like, here's the code. Go see it. They're set up perfect for this. I mean, you got to think about those companies that are like already there. They were a big part of this. And of course, when you follow the money trail, that's usually where you find the culprits, right? So, end of the day, he thinks that seller commission is at risk. He thinks it could all go away in the next couple of years, like all of it. Now, exception, you know, multi-million-dollar properties, you're probably going to need an agent for those. But your run-of-the-mill conforming, you know, with inventory the way that it is, unless something changes substantially with inventory, I don't know how much of a need there is for a buyer's agent. Truth. I mean, technology
Kind of
is
what I was
kind of
getting
big.
at, right? The
Yeah.
Redfins are already moving in 4% listing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It goes,
I'm just
you already
saying,
have that
they're
flat
set
fee
up fucking
listing.
perfect for this. Perfect. You know?
Like he said, only the desperate agents. I was like, there's a ton of desperate agents, my brother. Like, that's
Yeah,
over.
like 80% are desperate. 80% are desperate.
Well,
So
there may
80% of
be,
2
but
million.
he's very truthful in saying, because I've already heard that, because we can do dual agency in Idaho, but a lot of the brokerages are saying, no, you can't. So it's not up to me as a real estate agent to decide that
Sure, it's
just
brokerages.
because I'm desperate and I need the money that I can actually dual represent, because my brokerage is going to tell me no and slap me on the freaking.
So they start
No.
losing to Redfin, and they have to, right? It all comes down to dollars at the end of the day. Supply and demand.
Oh, yeah.
There's way too much supply of Redfin, not enough demand. So I just think like market supply and demand's gonna unravel this. Whether like the agents want to